Okay, check it out. We're on YouTube and I'm looking at a video of the great drummer Steve Gadd. If you don't know who he is, just Google him. You'll find out a lot of great information. This is a video posted by Drummer World, and the video has a lot of performances by him where he is demonstrating some of his famous paradiddles and stuff. And I'm going to be interested in the first couple of loops, and I want to show you how you would start with a video such as this and extract the groove, the time, and the feel to create an equivalent loop, in this case within Propellehead Reason. So let's listen to a little bit of this. Okay, already there's at least 3 loops that I've heard that I really want to get into my compositions. And the technology is there, it's been there for some time to be able to do this kind of thing. Now, the first step that you would want to do is to take the URL of this video and go to someplace like YouTube Converter. That way you could actually download the audio corresponding to this video. So that's one step that you might want to take if you're going to be following along with what I'm doing. The next thing I want to point out is I want to give you an example of an experiment. I've created a Reason file that uses some of these loops. Now, I didn't take the loops from the video. I recycled them. I chopped them up and mapped them to my own drum sounds. So take a listen to the experiment that I generated, and then I'll talk about how I did it. What you're looking at is a blank template, a Reason 10.2 template to which we will add the audio associated with the video. I'm going to add the track. I'll close out a couple of these windows so we can focus on the waveform itself. The first thing that you want to do here is disable the time stretch that's on by default. Disable stretch, so we get rid of that. Now, when I imported this file originally, when I created this video or started doing that, I noticed that the BPM was definitely a lot less than the default 120 BPMs. And I'm going to use the tap tempo function to match the downbeat. Let's listen a little bit to, I'm going to set, that's a pretty granular, 164, 132nd. These are very granular quantized. I want to move this over, and we'll listen to the file, try to match it. Now, there's a downbeat. So we'll match that. So it's somewhere, just by basic experimentation, we're somewhere in 72 beats per minute, that kind of thing. So what would I do next? Well, I would probably trim this file. It's set at 164, which is a pretty granular quantize. I'll bring this, ooh, I don't want to do that, see? And we have a locator. I'll just bring this back set the left locator here, and I'll set the right locator there, which I think is the loop. So let's listen to it. Not quite, right? So maybe we kick it up 73 BPMs. Maybe. It kind of works, but if you look, I mean, this is what bugs me. There's a lot of space here. There's a lot of, relatively speaking. So if we trim this even further, I don't want to do that because then we're chopping off part of the transient. But if I move there, I would feel more comfortable. If we look over here, it looks a little bit cleaner, but let's see what that gets us. Okay. What we could also do is look at the companion loop, the one that comes right after it. So there's this really interesting, in my opinion, beat that happens here. Very cool. And this is the infamous or famous Steve Gadd paradiddle that a lot of people talk about on YouTube. All right, so we have two loops. One is a basic loop followed by a paradiddle, both of which are played by Steve Gadd. And I want to basically recycle these and use the timing infill in the creation of my own drum loops using a built-in kit with Reason. To this end, I've created an NNXT using the Jazz kit. First, I want to razor this. I want to separate the two loops, or we'll start with a basic loop. Great. If you click this, you will see the warp markers here. It tells us, it's the way these are calculated, they're based on the transients of the loop. And if I use the speaker tool, I can figure out what each beat is offering. So for example, that is a bass drum and a hat. That's definitely a hat. All right, that's a snare. That is a hat. Sounds like a bass drum, a gentle bass drum. It's a bass drum and a hat. Sounds like a bass drum again. This might, yeah, that's a little bit different. I'll deal with that in a second. That is a snare. That's a hat. That's a little bit different. That's a harder thing to hear, so let me listen to the loop again. Okay, so at the end there's this little triplet thing or little kind of stuff. And if you're advanced in age like me, you probably want to write down what each of these things are. And let's create a Rex file. I'm going to bounce these to Rex loop. We go to the rack, you'll see that there is a Dr. Octorex. If we run that, it's our loop. Now I'm going to turn off loop playback and I'm going to copy this to its own track. Now if I listen only to it's the loop, right? And if we look at the timing here, you can see Steve Gadd's timings. You can see that he's a little bit behind the beat, after the beat, right? And this is great because this allows us to basically cop his timing. Now if I drag this down to the Jazz kit, it sounds like crap because what it's doing is it's triggering some notes according to the appropriate time, but See, I have to rearrange these notes. Now the good thing is that all I have to do is drag these. Now there's a little bit of a, that could be some of the silence right there, but this first note needs to be a bass drum, and there also needs to be a hat. Now you should have written that stuff down, right? There's the hat. This note should be a hat. Doesn't have to be the same hat. As a matter of fact, variety is good. This is a snare, right? This should be a hat. This should be a bass drum, but it should be a very gentle bass drum. So I'm going to adjust the velocity down. This is a bass drum. And there should also be a hat on this beat. Same timing. This should be a hat. This is going to be a bass drum too, a gentle bass drum. We had a little trouble identifying this, but let's just see what we get from this. There's the bass drum. Should be a snare, then a hat. Could be an open hat. Now the last thing, this is like a, what I'll do here is there's a great triplet sound. Let's try this. Ah, that sounds pretty good. Not perfect. Let's see how it sounds with the original audio. Not bad at all, really. So that's basically the workflow to get that first loop in order. It's contingent upon you making notes of what each transient offers. Okay, the next step is to give some attention to the more complicated loop, the secondary loop, or the second loop rather. Right, so there's a lot more going on than in the first loop. As a matter of fact, I might want to even treat the second loop as two smaller, as a combination of two smaller loops. Listen to this. And I'll slice this at this point, and if we do as before, you see that we'll have a number of slices. And as before, we can audition these and see what each slice has to offer. Alright, there's a bass drum and a hat. There's a hat. There's a hat. Snare. Hat. Hat. Snare again. Right, hat. Snare. Right, hat. Bass drum and open hat. Okay, so what I could do is bounce this to a Rex loop. I'll copy this to the sequencer, and you see that we now have a Rex loop that corresponds to this sub loop. As before, what I would do is drag this down and start reassigning the notes to trigger the appropriate sound. So okay, let's see how the more complicated loop came out. In other words, I recycled it and repositioned the notes to emulate the original audio track, and this is what we have. Okay, and in context, how does it match up with the original audio? I'll introduce that here, coming up. It's a pretty good match. Okay, it's not exact, but it's pretty good. Now, what I could do on top of this loop, I could add another instrument such as a guitar. I've recorded something that I'm calling Steve's guitar. Check it out. Okay, I like it. It's kind of a chill, laid-back groove, but it's got this drums and bass thing going on. And what I might want to do is take the MIDI files that I've generated and trigger another kit. And if you look down here, there's this down tempo, which is actually a Kong, and I'm using the down tempo preset. And I rearranged the loop a fair amount because the Kong has the samples are a bit more aggressive, and the velocity is a little bit higher. So go ahead and listen to what we have here. Now, if you go that route, you can bring in any drum source. If you have Native Instruments battery, or if you have any kind of drum plug-in, you can move this MIDI file around. The only problem you're going to run into is that you will have to remap these MIDI notes to trigger the correct or the desired sound, just like I've done here. And notice that I've had to mess with the velocity, because if you move these MIDI notes to a new kit, the sample may be very loud or not, so you're going to have to make adjustments accordingly. Since I went to the trouble of recording a short guitar phrase, I wanted to present another experiment that I generated using that, just to show you that I can use the Gadd loops that I've recycled in a number of contexts. So check this out and see if you can hear the loops that I'm using. And well, anyway, I hope you like it.